Hello everyone, my name is Alex Ray and I'll be presenting my 8-minute presentation today for Art History 219. This project has us examining classic Mayan art and architecture, so I decided to focus on the late classic Mayan period, specifically the great city of Copan and its ball courts. Even more, I hope to show how this ball court, and ball game for that matter, reflects the social, cultural, political, and religious significance of this median to the Mayan civilization. To preface everything, I have collected photos from the internet, which I have credited owners for in my reference section. And for the foundational information about the game, architecture, etc., I will be pulling from our course textbook, the Miller 6th edition, and the course lecture videos. Without further ado, let's move on to the presentation, titled The Cultural Importance of the Mesoamerican Ball Game, an examination of Copan's Great Ball Court. So for this first slide, I really wanted to begin with an overview of the ball game to first help listeners conceptualize it before we move into deeper detail. The ball game, believed to be called Pakatok, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, by the Mayans, consisted of two teams, a human-crafted hard rubber ball, and a slanted ball court with a T-shaped cutout, as you will eventually see it in future slides. This game was incredibly important to the Mayan civilization, as with other Mesoamerican civilizations, as we'll get to in later slides. The real goal of the game here was to get the ball through the hoop, similar to contemporary basketball. However, players could only use their hips and sometimes the top of their thighs to hit the ball in. This makes things really interesting and difficult, as players could not use their arms or legs to put the ball in. And I found this to be really one of the most interesting things that I learned about the game. And I questioned what made the Mayans choose the hips as the quote-unquote hitting spot for this game. With this in mind, I'd really like to move on to the next slide, but I want to point to a couple of the photos here on this slide. That is a depiction up in the top left of the hoop, the ball court. And the bottom left, we'll get to that in the next slide, but these are some kind of depictions of what the ball game may have looked like in ancient Mayan civilization. The city of Copan was believed to have many great ball courts, but pictured to the left is one of the most well-preserved ball courts found in modern-day Honduras. Put right in the middle of the city, the ball court's location shows how important the game was to the Mayan civilization as well as the city of Copan. Again, as I mentioned in the previous slide, the trademark beautiful T-shaped cutout in the grass with the slants of the ball court infrastructure are present in most of these ball courts. It also looks and seems to be like there are some sort of stands present for people, including aristocrats and rulers, to view these exhibitions in great games. Pictured in the upper right is a painting of what the ball court may have looked like in its prime days of use. And in the lower right is a contemporary, looks like a watercolor painting of the ball court in Honduras today. I specifically chose to talk about this, the Copan ball courts and ball game, for my presentation because I believe that these ball courts show not only the Mayas' innovative architectural progression, but I also say an intellectual progression due to the complexity of the rules and structure of the game. For lack of better words, these ball courts are incredibly intricate and complex, beautiful pieces of architecture. I look at the modern photo depicted on the left and just really daydream, thinking of the people that once played and watched games here. It's just really a portal into the past, and I have looked at it greatly as I've been developing this presentation. I'd really like to go see it for myself, but we don't have time for that because it's an 8-minute presentation, so on to the next slide. Now this next slide details some other artwork that was inspired by ball courts and ball players, and they can tell us a little bit more about how this game was perceived. These players had their own kind of social status in the society of their time, as well as, how we learn that in lecture. Not quite nobility, but still noteworthy individuals within their society. It's interesting to think of such players in relation to modern athletes. I kind of wonder how comparing them at kind of a systemic level of interest by the general public, how similar they would be to our modern athletes. Anyways, here are a few pieces depicted here. I wanted to focus on the, quote, ball player, the small ceramic figure in the bottom left. I wanted to focus on it because it gives us a closer view of what ball players' uniforms may have looked like, with protection or guards around their waist to protect their ribs and hips from the impact of the solid ball. As we learned again in lecture, ball players would sustain serious injuries from how solid the ball was at times. So it's interesting to think of the protective gear here. Kind of another clue at advancement in thinking, as well as how much the Mayan civilization in society cared for these ball players, for their physical health. As a note, this ball player piece is being held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Again, I'd really like to go and see it. Another piece I wanted to focus on was the South Court relief panel depicting a sacrificial practice of extricating a ball player's heart. Sometimes a consequence of losing a ball game would be death, and was a common practice in this era. However, I will try to touch on that more in the next slide. So let's move on. And by the way, really love all the pieces that I decided to depict here on this slide. So my final slide here, I've chosen to talk about the importance of this ball game to the social, cultural, political, and religious kind of significance that it had for the Mayan civilization. I've already kind of touched on a bit on the social aspects of the game, kind of with aristocrats showing up to support games and rulers and ball games having this kind of unique, significant social status. However, what I have pointed to, I haven't pointed to the other levels of significance, only a little bit. As we learned in our lecture, and at times in our book, ball games were sometimes used as a substitute for war, which is crazy to me. Instead of using their soldiers, rulers would play ball games, and if they lost, their ruling area or land would go to the winner. I believe this is what is being depicted in the photo in the top left, with two rulers dueling for their rights to their land and ruling power. I found this incredibly interesting because it shows how these rulers and people believed so much in this game and how important it was that it could be a substitute for war. I really couldn't imagine that happening in our society today. And it just is incredibly interesting, and I honestly like to read about it more if you have any suggestions on where I should go with that line of inquiry. Along those lines, the game served as a significant religious event as well, with losers often being sacrificed to the gods. We touched a little bit on that in the last slide. We saw a piece of art that in our lecture that depicted a decapitation. And again, on the last slide, we see someone's heart being pulled out of their chest. And again, this was common, but again, interesting kind of paradigm to view this game through. Getting that 8-minute mark now, I really want to begin my closing statements. And I believe this game gives us a look into the minds of the Mayan civilization, maybe much more than other kind of mediums, and helps us understand more about their culture and what was important to this culture. So to kind of end off, here are my references, both for the foundational information, as well as for the photos, using the course textbook, the course lectures, and then there are all of my photos. Please let me know if you need any more references or if they're in the correct format. On a side note, I think to end this off, I'd really love to attend a modern rendition of this game. As we saw in the lecture video, I think that would be really cool. And I'm really excited to hear what you think about my presentation. I had a lot of fun putting this together, and I look forward to the rest of the course, as well as other opportunities to express my interest and kind of my own conceptualization of these pieces in this form of dissemination. Thank you so much, and please let me know if you need anything else. This will be in, I'm using iMovie right now to record this, so if you need it in a different form, please let me know. Thank you so much again.